Monday the 23rd of May, and as is our custom, we'll start the meeting with a moment of silence. Thank you. Commissioner Farrell, would you lead us in the pledge?
Well, we've made one little change on that. We do have some Boy Scouts here that we will ask them to lead us in the pledge.
Excellent. Excellent.
His name is Hunter Quinlan.
Hunter Quinlan, glad to have you.
You please join me in the pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to have our Boy Scouts here.
Absolutely. And I was going to introduce him later in the meeting, but this is Hunter Quinlan from Troop 93 here in Pittsboro, and he's working on his communications badge and is attending tonight to fulfill that badge. So we'll recognize him at that time, at this time. And call for a motion. The agenda is before you. Are there any changes or postponements off the consent agenda that would like to be made? If not, can I hear a motion to approve the agenda as written? So moved.
Second.
Moved by Pamela Baldwin, seconded by Michael Fiocco. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the motion carries unanimously. Likewise, we'll ask for a motion on the consent agenda. This is a call for action on the consent agenda. There are 6 items on the agenda, including minutes and budget ordinances amendments. And is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Michael Fiocco.
Second.
Seconded by Jay Farrell. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries unanimously. We have public expression time at this point, and we have 2 people signed up. Greg Lewis would like to speak on the revitalization project. So welcome to the podium, Greg.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Greg Lewis. I live at 78 Lauren Rose Lane in Pittsboro, and I'm also the owner of the Pittsboro Roadhouse. I'm also on the board of the EDC, the Economic Development Corporation. I'm on the Main Street board. I'm the co-chair of the Pittsboro Business Association. I'm speaking out today of my concern for businesses and others in our downtown on the cusp of this huge growth that's coming to Pittsboro and Chatham County. I don't want to end up being like downtown Cary that had all this huge growth going on around it when they did nothing in downtown to keep downtown alive and vibrant. I want to be more like Apex, that was forward thinking and kept expanding and growing downtown and improving on the sidewalks and the walkability and parking of downtown as they grew around the downtown. We want to be ahead of the competition that's coming. There's a lot of shopping centers that are opening up and down and through 15501. As Chatham Park comes, they're going to be building 5 town centers to try to attract lots of people there. The public, lots of stores, walking around, shopping, dining. They'll be beautiful, they'll be safe. They're going to build gathering spaces. There's a new gathering space going up at Briar Chapel with the restaurants. And they're all not going to have a lot of noisy traffic going through their downtown like Pittsboro currently does. So Pittsboro has an opportunity before it to work with North Carolina Department of Transportation, and they're willing to partner with Pittsboro. They're willing to foot the bill for revitalization of downtown Pittsboro. We're going to work on more sidewalks. We're going to make our sidewalks safe. We're going to make them level. We're going to make them ADA compliant. Around the circle where a wheelchair cannot get up on the sidewalk, the way that sidewalk ramp is designed, if there's a car parked there, a person in a wheelchair cannot get up on the sidewalk. The steps are there, they're uneven. The steps in front of S&Ts and the Woodwrights, they're all uneven. They're unsafe, and they're not ADA compliant. Let's see, I lost my place here now. Then we're looking for safe pedestrian crossings, on the circle to make them shorter distances from the outside of the circle to the inside, and we can make it safer for the pedestrians to cross the road. If we slow down the traffic on the circle, it'll be easier for people to get across the road. I can get across that road pretty quick, but there's some older folks. We have tour groups that come through the museum, come over to the Roadhouse, and I'm watching them as they cross the street, and I'm just begging, praying that they don't get hit. Moms with kids in strollers or young kids that are walking across that circle, and I cannot tell you the number of cars I've seen coming north on 15501 that hit the circle and turn left. I don't know why they do that, but they turn left going up the circle. There's not enough of a deflection at that median to make them turn right. The traffic flow in and out of the parking corners on the northwest and northeast corners and the southwest corner. Right now, cars sometimes are backing out of those parking spaces into the circle. We want to make those bigger. By redoing the circle, those areas will become bigger, and it'll be easier and safer for cars to get in and out of there, and there'll be sidewalks on those areas. Currently, you're walking across the parking lot when you're going through those areas. There is not a marked sidewalk there. So, cars aren't looking for you. Let's see, I guess, so what I'm saying is I am in favor of us working with DOT to get this done. If we beautify these corners, the northwest corner, the southwest corners, we can hold events there. Currently, the PBA is looking to hold an event in downtown Pittsburgh on July 3rd. We want to close the street. We want to make this a festival. We want to make this an annual festival. Most of you were present when we did the holidays, when we did the tree lighting. You saw how many people turned out for that, and we narrowed the circle for that, but we didn't close anything. We expect there to be many more people at this Summerfest event that we're going to have. And we look forward to working with the town on the July 3rd Summerfest. Look forward to working with the town to work with DOT to make this happen, to make us move forward, to make us ahead of what's coming. I'm not speaking against Chatham Park, I'm just saying the downtown needs to be ahead of what's coming at Chatham Park. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. The next person signed up is Doug M. Doug?
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Doug Emmons. I live at 114 Autumn Chase in Pittsburgh. I serve on the EDC board as well, and also the Chatham Literacy Council. Also on the Main Street program, and on the Retire Pittsburgh. I'm in favor of the revitalization project that's being discussed in the North Carolina DOT project that's been described and being described later this evening. But I'm also in favor of Chatham Park. And from our last Main Street program, I was encouraged by the appearance of some of the newly signed commercial developers for Chatham Park wanting to listen in and hear about what our Main Street program plans are. And a couple of the suggestions that came out of that were to invite those people to join one of the PBA meetings so that we can have an appreciation for them of the businesses that exist today in downtown Pittsburgh, which are unique, and to also look at effectively balancing the businesses that we have here and attracting more businesses that are unique with the businesses that are being looked at for development in Chatham Park, much like a portfolio, so that when the businesses are recruited, we're looking for businesses that ideally are complementary and not directly competitive. Now, I know that's not possible in all cases, but wherever possible, if that's conceivable to do, that would be advantageous. And I was also encouraged by some of the initial thinking around combining a transportation route between downtown and Chatham Park to encourage people to go back and forth, because I think that's important. Many of the things that Greg mentioned are spot on. I mean, many of the things that we want to do to improve downtown, make it a destination spot, make it viable for many of the businesses that are here today and hopefully new ones to join us. I think we've got something unique here. I think we've got an opportunity to make it better. And I think there's a great opportunity to try to pull together and see what we can do to achieve that. So, that's all.
Thank you, Doug. The next part of our meeting deals with commissioner updates. And this is the time in which I generally report the functions that I've attended on behalf of the town. Before I do that, I'd like to note that I have signed a proclamation denominating this as Mental Health Awareness Month. It is a national recognition that's being done all over the state and by all over the nation, actually, to reduce the stigma and discrimination surrounding mental health challenges and to increase the awareness of tools and resources to prevent such. The proclamation goes on to say that 1 in 4 adults experiences mental health problems in any given year, and 1 in 16 adults experience serious mental illness. And since this is a part of overall health, we're urging that people begin to think of mental health in the same way that they think about physical health issues. These can be successfully treated, and the opportunity to open a dialogue to encourage support with those struggling with mental illness. So I have signed this proclamation for the month of May. So if that would be entered into the record, I would greatly appreciate that. In the last few weeks since our last meeting, I've attended on the 10th of May, I attended the EDC meeting in which we talked about the new industry coming to Siler City, Mountain Air. On the 16th, we had a joint meeting of the Planning Board to examine the Uniform Development Ordinance. On the 19th, I met with Habitat and residents of the Tumor Loop area to discuss how they could help and how we could help to create a comfortable and safe neighborhood there in the Tumor Loop area. On the 20th, I did a ribbon cutting at the Fayetteville Street Interior Design shop that's just opened, and then on the 21st, and then John Bonnets and I and his 2 children had the pleasure of cutting the vine, not the ribbon, but the vine, at the Lorax Trail in partnership with the Children's Partnership. So it was very appropriate that we had his children along with us.
The Farm and Forest Trail.
Yes. Are there any other events that commissioners have been to over the last couple of weeks that they would like to mention?
Well, I'll just mention that unfortunately I was unable to attend the last Main Street program, but I understand it was a very good meeting. I did attend briefly the last PVA meeting and was happy to be able to respond to a business owner who was very concerned about HB2 and how it was affecting their business. And she inquired as to was the town taking a stance on that, and I was happy to say that yes, we had adopted a resolution in opposition to that. So I think our community, the business community, is feeling the effect of that as well.
Any other meetings? Sergeant? The next section of our agenda is the public hearing section. Is there a motion that we go into public hearing for these 3 items?
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Fiocco, second.
Second.
By Jay Farrell. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed. The first matter is a request to rezone 196 Hillsborough Street, and our planner, Jeff Jones, will make the presentation and then open it up for public comment.
Thank you, members of the board. We have a couple of rezonings for you to consider, have for public hearing tonight. The first one is 196 Hillsborough Street. Kind of go over the staff analysis a little bit. Here's the property location, which is just up from Thompson Street, going north on Hillsborough Street. The request is to rezone the property, which is 0.84 acres, owned by Atlas Boone. It's currently R12, as we can see in this current zoning map. R12 to O&I, which would be the blue that's adjacent to the property, which would consist of the French Connection and the community house that the town of Pittsboro owns. The future land use plan for the town has this designation as mixed-use town center, and the entire, pretty much from downtown around the circle up to the Chatham Mills area is designated as mixed-use town center to promote that mixture of homes and businesses north along Hillsborough Street. The request is in keeping with the future land use plan for O&I, and I can answer any questions, and we can go hear from some folks from the audience as well.
Steve Cochran has signed up to speak, so I think we hear from him right now.
Thank you, commissioners and neighbors. I appreciate the opportunity to speak here. My wife Betsy and I live at 217 Hillsborough Street, directly across from the Boone property. Over the years, since we've been there some 25 years, have seen several houses already converted from non-residential uses. And I am deeply concerned about preserving the historical presence of our neighborhood. I take it as a privilege to own the house that we own. It's a historic home, and for better or for worse, sometimes it's a headache to live in an old house, but we do enjoy living there. I enjoy working in the yard and hearing comments from folks that walk by, and a lot of those are strangers that are coming to town for the first time. I look at Hillsborough Street as one of the entrances to Pittsboro. Folks that are entering Pittsboro from the north, that's the entrance to our town, and I think it's important to preserve the historical integrity of that, of what Pittsboro was and can be in the future. I certainly enjoy seeing First Sunday when the town gets filled with people. Other events draw a lot of folks to Pittsboro, and I enjoy seeing businesses grow, but I'm very concerned about maintaining, again, the residential section. Some of my concerns in rezoning the property would be traffic. Will there be dedicated off-street parking for whatever business that might be? I did go by the planning office and was very nicely told that was not required to disclose what the intended use was for the property now, which concerns me that no one knows what's going to go in there. When I look at the description for O&I, it's institutional functions that can go from medium to high density. It's very vague to me as to what kind of business might be in there now or in the future. So again, I'm concerned about things such as traffic. Will there be added traffic to our street At times, it's very difficult to get out of the driveway if folks, the street's not marked with spaces, so that can be a problem. I would be concerned over business hours. Would it be a 7-day-a-week business? What kind of hours would be imposed on a business there in a residential section? I'd be concerned about signage. I enjoy sitting on the porch and watching the world go by. I would be concerned, is my view now going to be, and no offense to my neighbor down the street, but giant chickens and dinosaurs is not what I consider a residential view. So I'd be very concerned that that would become my view out of my front door. My biggest concern, though, I think, is what's happening to our street and the historical relevance of keeping it historical. Again, I'm privileged to live in the house. We live in the Barnes house, and someday after we pass away, I hope it will be called the Cockman house. That's a tradition in this town that the house gets renamed after you're gone. So I look forward to hearing that after I'm gone. But I'd like to know that it was kept as its intended use as a residence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve Cockman. Steve Cockman is the only person to have signed up. If there are other people who would like to make comment, the floor is open at this time.
My name is Walter Harris. I live at 281 Hillsborough Street. I had not intended to speak, but I am prompted by all the red that I see up here. One of the functions that I have performed in my varied and sundry opportunities in life was to serve as the town manager for the town of Pittsboro. I did that for a period of time, and then in the wisdom of that particular mayor and board, was fired and belonged to the largest alumni association in Chatham County, former town managers. During the time that I was there, sat in this room, Jane Powell came in and said, we need to look at the historic district of Pittsboro. And the town went to work on that and formed the historic district, which goes from Chatham Mill down through Hillsborough Street. And I won't go into all the details of what is there. But being a member of the Chatham County Historical Association, and having been involved in the history preservation, have been concerned. Just this past week, we lost the Edward Dowd House, which was built in 1904 by Edward Dowd, who was a black minister, who lived there, sold his house to the Bells, and followed the history along through who has lived there. Unfortunately, no one lived in the house for the last, probably 15 years. Linda and I have lived in our house, which is the William Reed Thompson house, built in 1924. We've lived there for 30 years. And one of the pleasures that we have is sitting on the front porch between 3 and 6 o'clock and watch the parade as it comes through town every day about 5 o'clock Monday through Friday. One of the concerns I have about slowing traffic down in the traffic circle is how far will it back up? Will it get all the way to Lowe's, and will it have to change the traffic lights out at Lowe's and McDonald's? My concern about this particular house is the Syke Johnson house, which was built in the 1890s. Highest and best use for that particular property is residential. Unfortunately, over time, that house has not been cared for, and would probably cost more to preserve it than it will to take it down. Again, what we see is an encroachment of the commercial park. Now, granted, O&I happened to be on the planning board when O&I was established for the property where the French Connection and the vacant lot and the community building was there. It was put in as a protector, a buffer
to, in all honesty, probably keep McDonald's from going where Elizabeth Pizza is, because the citizens were concerned at that particular point in time. It serves its function, as it is, as a buffer between commercial and between residential. I share the same concern that Mr. Cockman, Ms. Cockman share about encroachment of businesses. We already allow certain businesses within residential areas. I'd like to see that maintained. I think that the zoning that we have is sufficient to protect the neighborhoods. What alternative do you have? And I think one of the alternatives might be that whoever has the property and wishes to do something else with it other than have it as the highest and best use, which would be residential, would be to ask for a conditional use permit. That gives you folks some opportunity to say, this is an option. We approve what you are going to put there at this time. But the zoning doesn't change. The protection still remains for the community, for the neighborhood. But it gives the new owner, if there is a new owner, an opportunity to put in something different. But again, it keeps control with the board, with the town. Then if that person wants to divest of that property and change it, again, the new owner would come in and would have to ask for, if they wanted to put something else, again, would have to ask for permission from the town. So again, it gives continuing control to the town about the use of the property. It also maintains what is already in place. I can tell you, because I was on the planning board for 8 years, there was a lot of thought process that went into the zoning. Granted, I understand zoning does change, but it really focuses on what the plan has been for the town. And frankly, when I see all the red, that acts as a red flag to me. I would hate to see Pittsboro lose the historic significance that it has now, with houses that were built, some in the 1800s, some in the early 1900s, where people have maintained their homes and keep them in good repair. People tell us all the time, we like the view as we come into town. Personally, when I tell folks where I live, I say in Pittsboro. They said, oh, where do you live? Well, I live, the house with the white picket fence? Yes, that's not me, I live next door. But it's a landmark for folks, and everybody knows when I say the house with the white picket fence, the Wade Barber house. Or I can indicate the Old Manse, which it was also built in the 1800s. So I would speak that there are other options, other alternatives for the property owner, and I would speak against changing the zoning from residential to O&I.
Thank you, Walter Harris. Any other speakers? Questions to the planner from the board?
I'll just have to concur with some of our citizens that this does bring up a problem of where we're going to go, where we're going to stop this if we continue straight up the street with I know. I mean, we've really got to think where we're going to stop with this. And you could go from one house up to the next house and on up the street. Some very good points were brought up that I hadn't really thought about, to be honest with you. I appreciate you guys speaking to us. That does concern me regarding, how far we're going to go with the I know.
And I feel concerned too, because sometimes the business may start off in the old house, but the next business may tear it down and build a chain or something else. So how do we protect those homes and make sure they're kept historical?
Let's finish the board questions here tonight.
Well, I do appreciate you all bringing that to our attention for the historical district, and Pittsboro is a historical town, that's for sure, and we want to maintain that character. So I thank you all for making those comments, and really, really do appreciate that. But your concern is just the thing.
Wondering, is the applicant here, and do they want to speak to the issue?
I'd like to. I'm Ron Collins. I'm the guardian for Mr. Atlas Boone, who's currently in a skilled care facility. And the house is not repairable. I mean, it will be torn down, whoever gets it. I'm trying to get the most money for Mr. Boone's care that I can possibly get. There's not an option for me to ask for a conditional use permit, because I can't do that. So whoever buys it as residential property is going to convert it to something else, and they're going to make the money instead of Mr. Boone having it for his care. That's the only reason I asked for this. Any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay.
And then Mr. Boone, he's a kind man.
Anything further from the board? The public hearing process for this particular item then is going to close, and it will then go to the planning board at the first meeting next month, and then will come back to us for a decision later in June. Second meeting in June?
That's correct.
Okay. So we'll move now to the public hearing to rezone what's known as the Cronbach property on 15501. If you'd introduce that for us, Mr. Jones.
I will, and I'll be brief because the applicant has informed the town that he wishes to withdraw his application. And if it's the board's pleasure to do so, I would recommend that you take his withdrawal.
Thank you. So it'll be withdrawn from the agenda. Do we need a motion to that effect? Okay. Thank you. Our third public hearing item is to receive comments on the annual operating budget. And Brian Griesbeck, would you start us out? We have the town manager and the finance director, Heather Meacham, to speak to us tonight on this matter, if there is comment to be made. Let's see, is anybody? No one has signed up for the public hearing.
The purpose tonight is to hold a public hearing on the annual operating budget as required by state law. It certainly is not the only public hearing that needs to be held on. You're welcome to schedule as many as you want, as long as we have timely means to post it, and as long as we pass it by June 30th of this year, pass the final budget by June 30th of this year. This is certainly tonight not expected to be the final step in the process, nor would the document, what I expect the document to see before you tonight be the exact same document that you eventually pass sometime before the end of June. My recommendation would be, if there are no comments from the public on this document, that we proceed forth with the meeting and continue on to the budget discussion that's scheduled under item number 3 in old business, and we can go into greater detail at that time.
There is no one signed up, but if there's someone in the meeting that would like to speak on the matter of the budget, hearing none, then we'll proceed then to go back out of public hearing status. Is there a motion to go back out into regular session?
So moved.
Moved by Michael Fiocca, seconded by Pamela Baldwin. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries and is unanimous. Under old business, we have a presentation tonight by Kimberly Horn about what Greg Lewis spoke about the traffic circle design and matters regarding the DOT project. So, welcome, Sal.
Good evening. Mayor and Commissioners, I'm going to do as quick as possible kind of flyover of the vision plan that is now going on 2 years old, and the proposed streetscape improvements, which are really the first phase of implementation of that plan that was adopted back in June of 2014. And then we will be here to answer questions. I'll let you know that this evening we have Justin Richardson with NCDOT, who's the Assistant District Supervisor. And I have Jason Pace with me also as well from Kimley-Horn. So looking back very, very briefly, and this will tie in nicely to the comments of Mr. Lewis previously. 2 years ago, we had a community-led vision for downtown. And during that process, we looked sort of big picture, long-term for the community's vision of what downtown Pittsboro can be, what you would like it to be. And out of that, we identified some very specific improvements that might occur toward building that vision. And the motivation for that at the time, if you recall, was to try and secure funding from NCDOT for some initial improvements. And so we prioritized projects, excuse me, and identified them very specifically, put some cost estimate, high-level cost estimates to those projects in order to try to secure the funding. And just sort of timeline of that was, again, we're about 2 years into that process now. The study was adopted in June. And then we had contracts approved about a year later with DOT to produce drawings for the first phase of improvements. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. And then we had a survey completed. And really since January, so we've been on the ground, meeting with you, meeting with local business leaders, meeting with the community to talk about some very specifics of the proposed improvements and how it impacted those in town, and particularly property owners who were most impacted. And by and large, those have gone quite well. We've had some great input. And then we had an open community meeting in April that, again, was a very positive meeting. We had comments from those in attendance, but generally there appeared to be wide support for the proposed Phase 1 improvement plans. So this was the overall vision plan, if you recall. And it really was a broad vision of what is defined, what you as a community really define as your downtown. And we focused on things like open space and the importance of having event space in parks, how important parking was to the function of your downtown, and streetscape improvements, and how important it was to have good, viable streetscapes, how to develop a brand, and talk about design standards and big picture things that make the community, the downtown, feel whole. We talked about safety and a lot about pedestrian safety and accessibility. How do you get around town safely? And for those that are mobility challenged, how do we do that successfully? And we talked about materials and things that would kind of bring a unified appearance to your downtown. And so that was all a very big picture view that we did during that process. And so out of that process, again, toward moving towards securing funding, we identified some projects. Out of the meetings we had, we identified and prioritized projects, things that were deemed to be the most important by the community. And we identified them sort of, this was just an exhibit of where those projects might occur. And what came out of that was DOT committing some funding to prepare plans and advance the first phase of improvements. And essentially they came up with funds for what were the first 4 priorities on this list, which essentially were focused around the traffic circle. And so today, what we really are talking about in terms of first phase improvements are simply the first step towards really implementing that big picture plan. And that's really the goal here. This first phase of improvements is to address some pedestrian safety issues, some aesthetic issues, and to accomplish some goals that really set you up for the kinds of things that Mr. Lewis was talking about in a broader sense in terms of revitalizing downtown. So it's really the first step. So the kind of things that we've talked about, excuse me, in terms of those improvements are pedestrian safety issues. What kind of ties into pedestrian safety is the issue of slowing down traffic, particularly around the traffic circle. Improving entry and exit conditions to the traffic circle, which is primarily a safety issue. Improve vehicular safety, which is, again, looking how people enter the circle, exit the circle, and doing that in a more safe condition than what perhaps exists today. And creating better gap spacing within the circle. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as we talk about the idea of narrowing the pavement width in the way it tends to moderate the flow of traffic around the circle, get people in and out in sort of a more orderly manner. Limit wrong way turns. We heard from Mr. Lewis the observation of people turning the wrong way, which is primarily a function of having too much pavement out there. And then improve the design aesthetic. We have the ability to take pavement and turn it into green, and to deal with creating more space in the corners of the traffic circle, where we can start the process of enhancing the aesthetics of the downtown. And the brand and character of the town can start to be established through these improvements, because in doing these improvements you have to pick materials. What kind of paving? What colors? What's the nature of the materials? What type of lighting? What type of landscaping? And these are not decisions just about the traffic circle. They're decisions that we need to make in terms of the next phase of improvements and throughout your downtown, so that you have sort of a unified brand for your downtown. So quickly, the vision plan, again, talked about a lot of things, opportunities, parking, landscaping, safety. What I want to focus on tonight as we go into the details of these first phase improvements is we spent a lot of time talking about these corners, northeast, northwest, southwest, from an aesthetic standpoint, from a functional and safety standpoint, and from a pedestrian standpoint. So there are not good mechanisms of connectability in terms of sidewalks, pedestrian paths around these corners right now. You typically are having to walk through parking areas. Cars are literally parking out, backing out into the traffic circle, which is extremely dangerous. We know of one business owner that actually has to get out and navigate and do some traffic control while customers back out into traffic, which is probably not a good thing anywhere. And there's a desire to have more landscape in those areas, and maybe even create areas that maybe most of the time are for parking, but then at certain times you could shut them down and have it be part of event space. So we spent a lot of time talking about those corners, and the phase one improvements are really focused around that circle and the corners. Those corners are county property in many cases, and we have been communicating. The county has been involved in this process as well. And again, another corner, and some of the issues that we heard about earlier tonight in terms of the quality of sidewalks just being safe, being level, drainage details. This project will start to set some of the patterns for that, because we're going to have to tie out of that circle, tie into some of these areas. But as you move up the street, north, south, east, and west, then these issues of sidewalks and utilities and street furniture all become more and more important. But the first move we make here on these first phase of improvements will start to set the tone for what you do in the future. So during the vision plan, as part of that, we looked at these corners. We did some sketches in terms of how we can improve the parking situation. And of course, all this was predicated on narrowing the width of the paving. And what that does is, by keeping the interior of the courthouse circle, leaving that untouched, and bringing in the pavement width, then we accomplish all the things we're talking about. Pedestrian safety. Crossing 24 or 25 feet of pavement is safer than crossing 32 feet of pavement. We can create more greenery. We can create opportunities for landscaping, and do it all within a pavement section that is a somewhat of a universal design standard, certainly within the range. A 25-foot pavement width for a single lane traffic circle is common, fairly standard, and we can talk about this in detail, but trucks move around it freely, and this happens. Excuse me. I'll get there. Wherever these traffic circles exist, it's a very common dimensional standard. It handles truck traffic, and we'll talk about that in some detail. But it does allow us to improve the quality of the corners and the treatment of corners. And so we looked at these corners long-term as potential park space. In the near term, we know how valuable parking is. But long-term, again, this feeds into the long-term vision of the aesthetics and the function of your traffic circle. And so this was a concept, sort of a detailed look around the circle. And you can see how the corner treatments are to be dealt with. We can talk about detail if you want, but again, we've met with the local property owners at each of these corners, had very good input, made some adjustments, and generally have support for the treatments on each of these corners right now in terms of maintaining parking and enhancing the aesthetics. In addition, this addresses some of the safety issues we have from a traffic standpoint. By pulling that pavement in and narrowing it, we've now created more room in each of these corners to deal better with some of the parking so that people don't have to back out into the circulation. And so each of these corners and each of these sketches have been reviewed with local property owners. In the midst of this, in the northwest corner, the town, in cooperation with NC State, has developed this concept for a rain garden. And they had funding was actually obtained for this prior to the vision statement, very early on the vision process. And so we will be working with the town to incorporate this rain garden concept into that northwest corner, accomplishing the other things that we want to accomplish. And the plans are in process, are being developed as we speak. And that's just sort of a visual image of the type of rainwater, rain garden, low impact development type of feature that would be developed in that corner. And so focus a little bit on the circle and the improvements and kind of what we're talking about. As I said, there are standards, design standards and engineered standards for traffic circles and roundabouts that are used literally all over the world. And there are always unique conditions and situations you have to pay attention to. But we start with some standards that we know from experience at work. And from a North Carolina perspective, DOT perspective, there have been many of these built, constructed, and so we have experience in terms of how they function and how they relate to your traffic circle here. Some of the keys involve the pavement width, how large that interior circle, the overall diameter of that circle is, and these islands as you enter and exit, what the configuration of those islands are, and the angle those islands hit the circle. All of those are sort of design variables. So we've heard you have a local circle or sort of an oval in town that maybe doesn't work as well as you would like. And some of the conditions there, again, are unique if you look at the angles of the roads, the streets that enter and exit that circle, and some of the dimensional specifics of that. So again, each of these begin with a design standard, but they're also unique in terms of their setting. So they're all not drawn exactly like this. But here are some of the key design parameters and sort of how they influence what we're proposing. So it's important to understand that interior and the overall circle dimension impacts the circle, and it's the primary influence on capacity and volume. So we've heard a lot of concern about backing up traffic. The truth is that the lane width of the circle is much less important relative to a traffic and capacity, how many vehicles the circle can handle. Much less important than, for example, the size of that circle. So if I were to exaggerate a circle this big and you think of cars moving around it, and I said, let's make the circle this big, and think of the giant circle at Pinehurst. You know, the bigger that thing gets, sort of the more volume, more traffic you can kind of put through and around it. The Pittsboro Circle is pretty large in terms of traffic circles, how they kind of lay out. Somewhat 240 feet across in some areas, whereas, let's say, the one in Southern Pines, which functions very well, is 160 feet across. So the size of that, and the kind of point I'm making is that allows much more volume, much more capacity, just because dimensionally the size of that We've done some in NC State that are 80 feet across, or that small, that handle trucks and buses vehicles, but it's very small. It's certainly not going to handle the volume of yours here. So the volume capacity issue is really, in part, largely a function of the size of that circle. Narrowing the width still gives you a one-lane travel lane around the circle, which is what you have today. That does not appreciably impact volume and capacity. We do have software models, and we took a quick shot at this one just based on the volumes that we know about in Pittsboro. And we just put the numbers in, and we get them out and see what result we get. And the amount of delay time or backup time associated with this circle when we ran that exercise was literally in tenths of seconds, which is essentially no impact. So that's just a sort of an engineering concept that talks about capacity and volume and the ability of the circle. If we make the proposed improvements, we are not going to improve traffic conditions around the circle as they exist today. But they're not going to make it worse. There are larger systematic issues that we've talked about on the whole road network that you, I think, are looking at, the DOT is working on, that are much more critical to volume and capacity than the lane width issue. So if that makes some sense, and I'll take questions on that with some of the experts here. But I just wanted to kind of give that perspective. One lane around the circle today at 32 feet and one lane around at 25 feet will essentially handle the same amount of traffic. What the lane narrowing does, it slows people their rate of speed around the circle, which means it slows them coming out of that circle, which is a safety issue that we have. Because when you pop out of that circle today, and especially some of the trucks that don't have to slow down, and immediately when you go to the circle, you know what you have there. You've got parking, and you've got people trying to back up. And you also have crosswalks where people are trying to cross. And so the less resistance I have, the faster I'm going to go, and the less concerned I'm going to be about dogs and women and children and cars backing up into my path. And so that's the real safety component of narrowing the circle. As I said, the 25-foot is commonly used. There are some single-lane circles or roundabouts that are down as low as narrow as 16 feet, perhaps. In addition, we've talked about in our meetings that we use these truck aprons, and we'll show you some images, very common. So what we do is we say, everybody in this room, and I'll leave my wife out of this conversation, should be able to drive within 25 foot of pavement. When a truck needs to have more room to circulate, we give them a truck apron, which is a raised change in material. The trucks know they can drive over it, and they'll take advantage of that. But the average vehicle is going to stay within that 25-foot pavement. Very common standard. We'll show you some images. But that's sort of the way we deal with the truck traffic versus the vehicular traffic. If we design to trucks today, you're going to have what you have, which is far more pavement and far more impervious area than what you need. And you're going to lose the ability to, again, accomplish some of the other aesthetic things we'd like to accomplish. So that's sort of the theory behind that. The other thing that the narrowing of the pavement does, and back to sort of the capacity and volume issue, is in an interesting way, and I found this out as I came into town today, having too much pavement out there gives people the feeling that they can just go, that they can just enter the circle. So cars coming around, and it sort of feels like I've got room to sneak in, and then, it's almost starting to look like NASCAR. And then I'll position myself ahead of you or behind you, and you actually start to get a couple of vehicles at those entry points. Or if I'm going to take that right leg out, then I'll just sneak in there because I know I'm going to turn right. The single lane width and narrow width will sort of modulate who's in the circle and how people enter and exit, and it creates sort of a more regular spacing so that people know when they can enter, and as other people exit, cars come in, everybody's kind of doing the delay that is sort of normal and expected. But right now, people get a sense there's so much paving out there that I can just sort of sneak out and go in and get a head start. And that creates problems, in addition to the problem of people potentially going the wrong way. So again, traffic calming within that circle in the one lane should not be confused with delaying traffic and backing up traffic. Because from experience and just from an engineering standpoint that all of our models show, that does not or certainly should not occur. The volume issue is a bigger systematic issue. So talked about materials, and we have the potential to select materials. They have to be selected based on certainly long-term maintenance and cost and safety, but there's a wide variety of things you can do today to do materials that look like other materials, or do materials that you just change color. We can make them look like brick, make them look like cobble. The importance of those decisions, again, are how they impact the long-term kind of standards that you start to identify and establish for the downtown, for the broader downtown. This project is not just about the circle. It's the first step in the bigger downtown revitalization. And so you see the images, and down the bottom is one of those truck aprons. It looks nice when there's nothing happening, but when a truck needs it, they can go over it and take advantage of it. And so you can see how fun you can get with a traffic circle if you really want to play with materials and colors and spend a little bit of money. It accomplishes everything you need to. You can see how the crosswalks stand out, which make them safe. The islands are planted. The pedestrians have a safe haven in the islands where they can stop, so they don't have to cross the entire road at one time. They can get in the middle. The drivers anticipate and expect that there will be pedestrians there, so they drive a little more carefully. And the interior, that paved pattern is really a truck apron, just made to look aesthetically nice. And again, just images of how nice you can make these with various treatments. Again, the interior raised island there, just before you get to the nice landscaping, is a truck apron. Again, a truck apron, in this case, with a pervious paving material. So from an environmental standpoint, again, we like to get rid of pavement as much as we can reduce the impervious. And again, there's an image of a truck, and there's not 25 foot of pavement there. That one's much narrower. Again, they'll take advantage of the truck apron, the gray concrete. But I don't know if that's a 16 or 18 foot pavement width right there.
A question about the aprons. Do pedestrians ever mistake them for sidewalks and walking along, and here comes a truck?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And really, if you do the design properly, the pedestrian path should be separate from those completely, so that does not occur. So in most cases, there'd be not much reason to run out to the circle and use that walk around it. But it's a great point. So what happens is, as we select materials, it needs to be very clear what a sidewalk pedestrian path is and maintain that material versus whatever material you use there. Don't use the same. So that's a really good point in terms of the design detail. You need to make it obvious that that's not intended for people to be walking around.
Sal, in several other, I think, presentations I've heard that the inner circle would not get touched and that the outer circle would come in.
Correct.
But there's a lot of talk about aprons at this time. So is the thinking as you design, is it changing in your mind that maybe there would be an apron added to the internal circle?
It is not right now. So the design right now is, and we've seen these in both, done both ways. This is the case of the apron on the outside. This is the condition that we think we have in Pittsboro right now. If we do these on the outside corners, we don't have to touch the inside. But what I would tell you is, if we advance, and as we advance the drawings, we continue to evaluate. We continue to run the software models. We continue to work with DOT. And if we get to a point that says, you know what, this just isn't working, 25 feet isn't working, it needs to be 26 feet. Or, you know what, we need to take something off the inside of that island to make this work, then we'll do it, and we'll communicate that with you. But right now, we believe that we can maintain that interior circle and do the truck aprons, accommodate those vehicles on the outside edges, which would be in the northeast, northwest, southwest corners. From the very preliminary drawings we have, we think we can accomplish that. But again, this is not to be, we have no preconceived notion of what the 100% solution is. If we can go ahead and advance the drawings to a certain point and keep analyzing, then we'll come back to you, certainly if something dramatically needs to change, and we'll have that conversation. So we've got the ability, to adjust. And of course, DOT has eyeballs on the plant, so that they won't, let us do anything. We really don't think it will work, but we can test scenarios throughout the design.
Sal, what about, since we're working so diligently with the DOT, is this truck route that I have been proposing for years and years around Pittsburgh to keep some of these trucks, that set delivery trucks, but to keep some out of town?
I am probably going to defer that to Justin Richardson here. If nobody throws anything at me, he's a bigger guy than I am.
So what would have to happen there, since it is a U.S. route, US 15501, to be able to sign an alternate route, you would have to designate a bypass for 501. So I think in the long-term corridor plan, there is a proposed 501 bypass on the west side of town. Until that's constructed and opened, basically 501, US 15501 will remain a U.S. route, and by law you cannot defer traffic away from it being a U.S. route. I think the way funding's set up now, basically that will have to go into the STI program, be scored and voted on to get that to progress towards being an actual project. But the way things stand right now, it would have to remain, since it's a U.S. route, we can't restrict truck traffic from it until that bypass is built.
Even, I guess, when we get our transmission line, that just being temporary truck route, that could not hold up then, correct?
No, unfortunately it wouldn't, and that's similar to the thing, when the water line went in a couple years ago. I had the pleasure to be part of that project, and some of the truck drivers were upset about it. You have some that enjoy, say, hey, I don't have to go through town, but then others, hey, this is my route, I go every day, so, it's all a matter of opinion. But, we can do temporary routes like that, basically temporary detours. As far as any permanent signage going up, we wouldn't be allowed to do that.
Well, it's unfortunate. I think one of the truck drivers left a load in our traffic circle this afternoon at some point. There's a lot of gravel out there right now.
A lot of rock, yeah.
And I don't think we want all truck traffic out. Obviously, we want trucks delivering products to our local businesses, but the folks who have no intention of stopping to Pittsburgh and want to get around Pittsburgh, that's who we're interested in getting out of downtown.
Right, and you do have 87. The problem with that, it's the capacity of 87 is just not up to standard enough. It would need to be widened. You come up, you still have to, get on 64 bypass, come back to 501. You're bringing traffic up to an unsignalized intersection. It's going to create issues there. So, unfortunately, the way it's laid out right now, it's just not set up for a truck route. But my advice would be pursue getting it onto the STI program, getting it scored and voted. It's going to get it that much closer to being a reality.
Is the STI, is that State Transportation Improvement Plan? Or
yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay.
You would work through the RPO, MPO.
I love all the initials.
Organization.
That's the one that we looked at, I think, at the last meeting, or maybe the meeting before. It had 12 different projects, and the only ones that scored and the only ones that are going to be looked at with any degree of seriousness are 2 projects in Siler City. Out of 10 or 12 that were, we thought, fairly compelling for this side of the county.
Right. So that was the ones that were voted on in this most recent round. I think it's presented every 4 years. It gets reevaluated. So it would need to be presented for the next round, I guess you would say, which would be in 2 years. I think at that time you would present it to be scored and voted on.
Yes, I have a question regarding the truck skirt that you were referring to. Some truckers have spoken with me about those skirts. They indicated to me that it actually damages the axles of their trucks by the truck going up sideways on there. So have you spoken with them about that, or they expressed that concern to you about that?
We have not really heard that, but I would say that the design of those can vary in terms of what that curb profile is, what that curb section is, how high it is, and what those materials are. So we can definitely work to that and talk about the ones that accomplish what we want, which is to keep the normal vehicle traffic off it, and yet maybe is not as severe for the truck traffic. Justin, I don't know if you've seen a detail that is more preferable, but...
Yeah, I mean, I haven't personally heard that concern. I could see if you had some type of low customized trailer of some sort. We do have one we're looking at now down in the Fort Bragg area. They're in the design process. They're actually going to accommodate it for military vehicles. But as far as just everyday truck traffic, I haven't heard that concern. But it's like Sal said, there is some design options there that we could look at.
This particular truckers that I was speaking with, he's the owner of a large fleet.
Right.
They actually carry laws.
Mm-hmm.
So those laws, and he said that basically it is damaging the axles, and he used the one on 87 as the example.
Okay.
We can definitely look at that again. There's options and details. Yeah, we want enough of an apron again to keep the normal vehicle traffic out of it, and allow the trucks to get on if they need to.
John Ryan?
I guess I can amplify Commissioner Farrell's concerns. I really wish that we had a way to see this as the opportunity, the time to transition truck traffic and other traffic that literally doesn't have any business going through downtown to another route. But it sounds like we just really drew the short stick, or didn't show up at the meeting, or are really in a bad place on this.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what the other projects were that it was scored against.
Sure.
I wasn't part of that. I'm not as familiar with that part, but unfortunately the way that, and we see this not only in Pittsboro, it's a lot of towns you see that are competing. The way it's set up now, you're competing with a group or a region. And a lot of it depends on how traffic volumes. There's a lot of different aspects they look at on the score. And, I'm not sure if at the time this was just kind of still in the works and not as far along. I don't know if that had anything to do with it or not. But I think unfortunately it would be 2 years before the next round of projects can be submitted for review.
2 years before it could even be submitted for review, and then
it would be voted on in 2 years. I'm sorry.
It would be
voted on. Submitted to be voted on and scored at that time. Yeah.
Okay. And then possibly how long after that before it might become reality? I recognize it's speculation, but
right. A lot of it I think is going to depend on the amount of funding.
Of course.
We got different projects. If it goes into as a TIP project, if it's broken down into segments, the size of the project, a lot of that you would take into consideration. Something like that with a bypass, I would be afraid to say, to even put a number. I mean, it could be, a couple years tied up. I mean, you're getting into design, right-of-way acquisitions, and then the construction of the project. So, it's kind of hard to put an actual time frame on it, but, once it's scored and voted and funded, I think that's a major hurdle there, and then it's pretty well there to move forward.
So it might take less time to persuade Luckstone and 3M to work with the railway to get that gravel back on the rail or on the rail.
Yeah, I mean, you know,
instead of on the roads.
And one thing too to encourage, I guess, as a town, you know, to those companies is, you know, especially if they're headed, you know, north. You know, I mean, it's all driver preference, but you know, they do have the option of the 87 bypass around, you know, to 64. It's just, you know, a lot of times they want the shortest and straightest route, so they do, you know, opt to come through town. But you know, I can't force them to by no means. But
so that has to do with voluntary discussion, voluntary action.
At this point, yeah.
And thinking this through, my goodness, at this stage, it almost seems like the impacts that we've all been so concerned about, the growth of Chatham Park, and that seemed to have stimulated this activity around the circle. Maybe we should have been thinking more broadly about the intersection of 15501 64 and the lack of a bypass around town, and things like that might have been a better focus for DOT's attention rather than this circle improvement. But it's just my half-baked opinion at this moment in time.
Well, I think really the impetus was the Main Street program, and and when the Secretary of Transportation came and presented to us, the understanding was it was an investment in a small historic town, and that of those many towns in North Carolina that fit that bill, that Secretary Tata thought Pittsboro was the best place to make that investment. So that's really where it came to be. That's why it's focused on the downtown and not other routes.
It may be how the truck skirt might motivate them to go a different route. Or slow down enough that they might decide to go a different route.
Did the Board of Commissioners receive an email today about this very topic from a woman who was concerned? I don't know if she's here tonight, but she was very concerned about the impervious surface aspect, and it was a long email. Can we forward that to you, Sal, so that you'll have the benefit of that?
Please do.
It was a really well-formulated email, I thought. You know, you spoke at we had the joint meeting in April, and I was absolutely shocked because very few people spoke up about the courthouse circle. And I think the implication of that to you all was that everybody was in agreement. But I think we've talked on this board, I can't think of a single topic that has brought more constituent concern. Jay, I know you've heard from a number of people.
Right, I sure have. I don't think everybody's really aware of it, because I was not either until I saw the presentation, you know, at the Roadhouse also. And but yeah, that has been a big talk of, you know, shortening the circle, narrowing the circle, slowing the traffic. It's already backed up through past my house. So that has been a real big concern that I hear downtown.
I'm not sure why people didn't speak up at that meeting, because I guess they were just trying to absorb what it was, that the information that was presented at the Roadhouse. But I don't think that we can assume that that means that everybody's in agreement. I think part of the problem, and you addressed some of it, is the disaster at the community college and library. And you alluded to that was an oval, and this is not an oval. But that traffic circle is a disaster.
And we certainly have seen some that don't work. Some of them are on private property. There's one in Cary in a new mixed-use development that doesn't work well, again, because there's too much paving. And the theory is that, you know, there's a certain amount of deflection required to have these things operate properly. So you have to make a decision. We've seen some where you can almost drive straight through the circle because there's so much paving out there, which defeats the whole purpose. And again, it makes it worse because it's a free-moving system, and you have people entering and exit. When you have an intersection, at least people are stopped, and you have some time to make decisions. So, again, the narrowing of the paving, again, just anecdotally and from an engineering standpoint, really should not have an effect on volume, capacity, and backing up traffic. All it simply does is make the movement around it more orderly in terms of how people get in and get out, and really should be a safer condition. The traffic volume issues, again, are going to be there until the larger systemic issues are dealt with. But it really, I don't think we'll feel from a functional traffic standpoint much different at the end of the day. Hopefully it'll look better, should be a little safer, should not have people going the wrong way around the circle. And I think you'll find it'll be easier, again, to enter the circle because there's a little bit more certainty about who's in their lane and when you can enter and when you can't, because you just don't have all that kind of free zone where people can move in and around sort of a little bit aggressively because there's just so much room out there to maneuver.
I do have a question. Sal, what would need to happen for us to achieve the maximum opportunity for influence on the project and collaboration between town staff and DOT?
So, I mean, we certainly have, there's been a lot to date, but if we can move the drawings along, we can start to look at the details, look at the engineering side, continue to communicate again between us, between DOT, and really start to evaluate what works and doesn't work. We know we have some really tight spots out there we're going to have to resolve in terms of we're working to existing conditions here. You know, we're not out in the middle of a farm field, so we've got to hold some spots, existing curbs, existing utilities, and things we have to work to. So I guess to your point, it's really the collaboration is if we can advance the ball, get into the details a little bit. Again, we're not going to go away and all of a sudden show up with a finished set of plans. Because we need to talk with you about materials and selections. But we also need time to, DOT has yet to really look at a set of plans where they can evaluate the detailed engineering of it. And so that's really I guess my best answer to that is if we can move the ball forward and then start to look at some things that we're just conjecturing about right now. For example, in the original study, which is 2 years old, the pavement narrowing is in here, almost exactly as it's proposed today. Although I will tell you, we called it at 24 feet, and even in our preliminary engineering, we bumped it out to 25 feet, just on initial analysis. That may not seem like a lot, but just, again, to give us flexibility in terms of moving vehicles around. But, you know, that was vetted in public meetings. We had a lot of people participate. Some of those people are not here in the room today, but so there's some new to the process. But the concept and what was adopted at the time is it's virtually the same if you look at the document as well. So it's not really new information. But I know it's a new idea to people and still, you know, anecdotally there's a lot of experience on the ground out there, and DOT has a lot of experience about these things working. But I know just sitting here and saying it works isn't quite enough. So I think if we can advance the process and start to let the drawings come together, let DOT look at it, we can then really start to compare this to other designs that are on the ground. The one at Southern Pines, which has a lot of truck traffic through it, is narrower, it's smaller, and seems to work well by all accounts. DOT did one in Randleman. Again, smaller dimensions to this, and your big dimension on the inside of the circle helps you here. The one in Randleman was actually set up to be larger, have more pavement width, and maybe even dual lane.
It was actually designed to be at one day. Ultimately, it would be a 2-lane roundabout. Would be as far as I know, would have been the first one in North Carolina, just due to projected traffic volumes. After it was constructed in 2008, completed. It was open for about 2 years. We went back, reevaluated it. We were having numerous accidents, low speed, low volume accidents, but we're still having a lot of bump ups, fender benders. The problem you had was you were having what they call a slip lane. So if you come into the circle and want to go right, you didn't actually have to merge in with the existing traffic. The problem we were having were cars that were already in the circle, not knowing when to exit. You would crisscross into each other. We actually went in looked at it, evaluated the problem you had was too much pavement. So what we done, we actually went in 2 years ago, extended the islands, what we call a refuge island, I guess you would say. We extended the nose out, kind of narrowed down the pavement. We had choked down the circle in a sense. To date, we have cut the accidents down significantly. It actually helps at lower speed. As Sal said, it's easier to tell once you come up to the circle kind of what the cars coming at you are approaching or planning to do. A lot less guessing. But we have seen it to be a lot safer and function a lot better with the narrow lane widths. Several different places that we have installed these.
One of the things that was suggested or mentioned at the Roadhouse meeting was that you all could come and put cones around the courthouse circle to show us what it would be like, so that we would have some sort of a little demonstration. And that might help our constituent concerns, because at this point I would love to be able to do something that would not only calm the traffic but calm the constituents as well.
Mm-hmm. We've talked about that. It has been done before, and we can certainly look at that. We would really want or need to advance the drawings to a point where then we know what we're going to, what to show on the ground. One of the challenges here is if you were to paint the proposed geometry on the ground right now, the islands that exist today, you would be driving over because they can be reconfigured. So there's some challenges to doing that. We could certainly maybe put some temporary paint on the ground so people could just see dimensionally what it looks like. Just as the image there, if that's a single lane circle, what you have out there today is almost 2 times that much pavement out there. And so you can see, the difference between driving in a single lane, waiting to enter the circle and seeing a car coming around, versus having twice as much paving and feeling like you can, again, sneak out there. So I think maybe we could find a way to show some of that on the ground out there, but it would be a little challenging here because of the island configuration. You'd almost have to demo the islands out there in order to do a temporary installation, because people would ultimately have to be driving over them. So we haven't looked at it in detail, but that's one of the things we'd have to think about. But if we can find a way to do it. Other ways we've done it, we've done mock-ups out in the middle of a parking lot at a school or something, just to show dimensions and have trucks come and drive around it. I mean, we've done some things like that too that just give people a sense. The best way is probably finding installations that are similar in design and dimensions and having people visit or maybe do videos of them just to show how they operate and show communities that are working with those and working with them successfully. But you did, Ms. Foley, you kind of joke, but the truth is if you're accomplishing what you want to accomplish in your downtown and you make some of these changes and your downtown is busier and there's more people on the street and there's more cars and all that, then there are truck drivers who will find that the least path of resistance and find another way to go.
I think one of the most compelling parts of this plan is making it easier for people to cross the street. I mean, I really think that is very compelling. If we want to strengthen our downtown, that encourages people to walk to the other side of the street. And so to me, that's the most compelling part of this is kind of unifies the downtown if people can feel more comfortable crossing. And so that to me is an important piece of this. But again, I'm kind of a fan of the wide because I guess I'm one of those sneaky people, because if someone's veering off to the right, you can go ahead and start pulling around, and that keeps it flowing. And so that's the part I think that I will miss, is that there is kind of this, people who live around here know how to drive that circle, and you do work it. And I'm concerned about if it's narrowed and the traffic is more regular, is it going to be difficult to get out into the circle? It's so spaced, everybody's spaced just right. How are you getting out there?
Just one thing to keep in mind, that the circle is part of the bigger picture.
Right.
So if the pavement were left as it is today, then we can't address the corners the way that we've talked about in terms of fixing the parking areas, maybe getting more green space and doing some things that the local business owners have asked for. And so, those are sort of the trade-offs. If you do one thing, you can't do something else. But it's certainly one of the big benefits is bringing that pavement in and being able to accomplish some of those things that you need to accomplish on the corner from a pedestrian standpoint, from a parking standpoint. With the pavement you have out there today, you're just constricted because you've got buildings that aren't going to move. And so it's, again, it feeds into the bigger vision of the plan.
Well, I'm very optimistic about the prospects for improving parking. I think I have confidence that is very possible. And any green space that we can gain from this effort would be fantastic. And stormwater best management practice would be even better. Notwithstanding my concerns about a lack of a bypass, when I feel like we're causing more of a problem for necessitating a bypass, I'm not interested in holding this project back. I am interested in seeing it move forward. I just wish that there was an opportunity for us to address greater concerns outside the circle.
Would be in conjunction.
Yeah.
I'm in favor of it too. I think it's something we need to do. I think people don't like change sometimes, and it's going to be a change. But I think that it's going to bring some good benefits to the downtown for sure.
Any further questions for Sal?
Well, I'll just mention that when I first met with Brandon Jones, the new division engineer, about the bypass idea, he was willing to look into what other options there were. And so I felt optimistic that he recognized the issue, recognized how it was a part of this project as well. And so I know that we've scored the 87 bypass, I think 10th out of 10, and but that's a project that goes all the way through Alamance County. So the cost of that project is a real negative when it comes to scoring, and perhaps in the next 2 years we can revise that project maybe to 64 bypass and be a more popular project in the scoring. So I think we've got options. Obviously, we don't have a fix immediately today, but this project in and of itself will take years. And so we need to be looking for those types of time frames.
Yeah.
Well, we can't say, oh, tomorrow we've got it done.
Thank you.
But really, 2, 3, 4 years from now. And really, the downtown vision plan has, I think, maybe 14 projects identified over 15 to 20 years. And when the Secretary came to town, there was a commitment to investing in Pittsboro. That Secretary is retired. The next one has come in and acknowledged that they will stand behind that commitment with Pittsboro. So it is a long-term project for all these improvements. So they need to keep that in mind. Yeah.
I do have one more comment. I know a lot of times you do actually do a traffic study right there on site so that you can see how the traffic is moving and everything. I don't know at what point you do that, but what Commissioner Foley was talking about, how at certain times of the afternoons, around 5-something, 5:30 to 6, if you're coming in from East Street, then a lot of times some people are trying to merge this way, then some are trying to go that way. That's a major problem. I mean, that is very major. And it can cause a lot, it has potential to cause a lot of accidents. So I don't know whether you all are going to be on site actually looking at the area during rush hour before you do any more preliminary plans, or what the situation may be. But that may be something you might want to look at.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'd love to have you on Friday afternoon. I've got a porch that I'll make available.
Sounds like a great idea.
Lemonade, too.
And iced tea?
Yes. Thank you very much. All right. The next item under our agenda is the ordinance for road closure for a summer festival. Percy Crutchfield, will you help us out with this?
First, I'm going to give you all a revised copy of the ordinance that was on your agenda packet. Mr. Messick emailed me a revision that he wanted made to it. So, sir, you can update if you want to leave with you. You've already got it. As y'all know, I believe this was brought forth at a previous board meeting in the public comments. Mr. Grusbeck asked me to look into the Pittsburgh Business Association that want to do a summer festival on July 3rd. And y'all got my memo. I've been requested to look into closing of the PBA has requested closing Hillsborough Street for the 2 blocks north of the circle. So this is kind of a continuation of the discussion we've been having on the traffic circle and on the rezoning of the houses on Hillsborough Street. But Mr. Grusbeck said he had presented the PBA with a couple of options. Of course, the closing of Hillsborough Street, the closing of Hanks, Cradle, and Salisbury Streets area like we did the street fair, and the closing of Chatham Street, which was recently done in a recent spring thing that the athletic boosters did. We've seen those work pretty well. The North Carolina DOT requires that any closing of their street, look, we have a representative DOT here, so he can correct me if I'm wrong. We actually have to pass an ordinance authorizing the closing of that street, and we also have to present them with a plan, detour, because as it's been discussed, this is actually 2 U.S. highways. It's U.S. 15 and U.S. 501. So we have to present them with a traffic control plan where we're going to divert all these commercial motor vehicles, which we've been discussing for the last half hour and all that. So presented is an amended ordinance if we decide to do option 1, closing Hillsborough Street, for y'all's review. And then also, I feel like I'd be remiss in my duties if I didn't open up options 2 and 3. And of course, we also have the option of denying that, but I don't think that would be the way this board would see it. Just need to be aware of all the possibilities one way or another. Obviously, by my count, there's probably somewhere around 4,000 to 5,000 cars during this time frame that we will have to divert through our side streets if we close Hillsborough Street. It's a very busy section of road, and I've used our new radar trailer to do some traffic counts. And it was approximately between 12 and 9 on Sunday. I've got the date. Anyway, one Sunday we counted the traffic going north, right there near Mayor Perry's house. And the following Sunday, or not the following Sunday, this last Sunday, we headed in front of your house, controlling traffic. He always does a traffic count. And it was approximately in that time frame around 2,400 to 3,000 cars going in each direction. So you can double that because it only counts in the direction it's clocking radar. So I just want to be sure y'all aware of it. If we do divert that traffic off Hillsborough Street, we're going to have to divert it through our residential community.
Questions from the board? Have we ever done this before?
I think we did. This is before my per year here, but I believe we did it for approximately 2 or 3 hours for the reopening of the courthouse. Or,
Yeah.
So I don't know if we did 2 blocks or 1 block. I'm sorry, I just don't know. So we have done something similar before for 2 or 3 hours, and I don't know what Chief Collins' traffic control plan was there, how they went through the DOT or what. I wish I could tell you, I just don't know.
Didn't see here before what they have in mind about why they want this first group or something.
I think I've gotten, of course, Greg is here and he's involved. I've got somewhere here the map of the layout, but if you want, I'll be more than happy to see the podium to Greg so he can answer some of your questions.
Well, what we're talking about is, come over here.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Currently, we have First Sunday right on Hillsborough Street. Everything takes place in the sidewalks, a couple of parking lots, and then the Roadhouse parking lot as well. So what we want to do is make July's First Sunday a much larger event, make it a townwide, make it a celebration of Independence Day. And if we were to take that and move that over into the Justice Center parking lot or the Roadhouse parking lot or one of the other options that Percy gave us, we then have two separate events going on. You know, we'd have First Sunday going on in downtown on the sidewalks, and then we'd have everything else going on somewhere else. In this town, you wouldn't even really see them. You know, you wouldn't know you have two events going on. We want to create one big event. We want the courthouse to be the backdrop of this event. We want to bring everybody into the town, in front of our shops, in front of our businesses, let them see how beautiful our town is, not how beautiful a parking lot is. You know, there will be events, you know, at part of this, you know, that are spread out, not just on those areas, but spread out a little bit. But we need to show off downtown. You know, we need to have one big event. We want to put a stage right at the end of Hillsborough Street with the courthouse as the backdrop, and you know, have a couple of very popular local bands playing there, and they'll be playing until 9 o'clock at night. If the town wants to supply fireworks at 9:15, that'd be great, you know. But just make it a 4th of July celebration. You know, there are no other events on that day. We did our research. We're not competing. You know, it has been widely accepted. We've been sharing it all over. We have a lot of volunteers. We have a lot of organizations. We have a lot of interest in this, from people that want to participate and people that want to come as guests. You know, when we, like I said earlier, when we did the holidays, the tree lighting, you saw how many people showed up for that. This will be bigger. That's our vision. You know, there's be thousands of people instead of 500 people.
And we also want to make this a yearly event. We want to do this every year. This is not going to be a one-time thing. We want to continually bring people to downtown.
Right, much like the tree lighting. You know what I was saying. We want to make downtown a beacon. We want to make downtown a place to be. We want to attract people into downtown, into our downtown, and make it special before Chatham Park starts building all of their town centers. And again, I'm not speaking against Chatham Park. Chatham Park is one of our sponsors for this. You know, so we're working together with them to make this happen. So, you know, we just hoping that the town will work with us as well.
I'm really excited by the vision and the plans. My family and myself, we frequently attend the First Sunday events, and I've always felt like it's just a cramped shuffle walk. And I've always longed for a bigger event that can bleed into the streets, where vendors can be given the space for their clients, their customers, to come and go without having to inch past. I'm excited about it, and I am very hopeful and optimistic that we do it, and we do it well, and that we learn a lot from this. I think that there's no doubt going to be some repercussions. I'm very glad that we're thinking this through. I'm hoping that maybe we can communicate with folks in those neighborhoods that will have bypass traffic. Again, I'm very optimistic about it, and I'm very hopeful that we might be able to do this more often. Perhaps the winter holiday event as well. I think it's really the way that we can shine, or put a real shine on downtown, and allow the businesses to maximize the opportunity, allow our citizens to really get out and enjoy the space and transform that busy street into a celebration space. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I recall when the courthouse reopening, when the streets were closed, there weren't a lot of people, which was disappointing because it really did have such a nice feel to it when it was when there was no cars through there. It just really was cozy and it's a very nice space to do that.
And also, I want to be sure y'all aware the success of this is contingent on me being able to get enough help. Right. It's just like our Christmas parade. We are a small police department. You've seen our personnel roster. I'll have to be hiring off-duty deputies and probably some other organizations to help us. So that's another reason we need to get the ball rolling on this, to be sure that I can get adequate help if we want to go with that option. Because there's no way that I have the resources in my department to shut down for 7 hours US 15501 and detour through all those residential areas.
Something that people from all over Chatham County turn to.
Yeah, is there anything that we can do? I mean, you can't accept anybody except a certified law enforcement agent to...
Well, it'll mostly be obviously for the traffic control points.
Yeah.
Certified officers, or also possibly town staff that is trained in traffic control, but most of them have to be certified law enforcement for the obvious reasons. We're the enforcement authority. We're the only ones that have the legal authority to be a traffic control person. They can help us, like, pull the cones, set up the barricades, but that's really, we have to be a law enforcement agency. That if somebody, and it is a concern. I mean, if you watch WRL News, somebody got run over at the barbecue festival, and I think it was 8 or something this weekend. Somebody, ran over somebody. So, you got to have, law enforcement officers at those checkpoints.
Very important.
And, the only other concern I have, again, pros and cons, is us running in traffic detours right around that immediate area. There's going to be limited parking because I can't allow people to park on those side streets and run. I'm not exaggerating the number, probably at least 4,000 cars through those side streets during that time frame. So we're going to have to restrict parking on those side streets immediately adjacent to it. So that's another concern I have. I think if people use some common sense and park in the other outlying areas, it won't be a problem. But, unfortunately, sometimes people just want to take the most direct route.
It's possible to route the traffic like through down Old 87 and through Sherwood Forest out that way.
Well, that's too far up to go. It would even take more officers. We're actually going to try to direct it around the Hank Street area by Pittsburgh Baptist Church back out to 64. And that'll be, and we'll actually route the commercial motor vehicles up 87, the ones that are coming north. And then the commercial motor vehicles, we're actually going to have to route all the way down Thompson Street back to 64 because that's the only road that's rated for commercial motor vehicles, even though Thompson Street's small. And we'll actually have to route through our side streets. So that means we'll actually block off a block in each direction of Salisbury Street also to keep people from getting confused and trying to drive right up into the middle of the van. So, thank you, Ms. Cruz. So basically, we're talking about this 2-block area here. So we'll basically have to figure out traffic through here and here. And the commercial traffic, we'll catch it coming here and just send them up 87. And then the commercial traffic comes south, we'll send them down Thompson, and they'll have to reroute back.
Do you have any sense about how much it would cost to hire additional help to do this?
The sheriff's office charges me $30 an hour for each deputy. And depending on how much of my staff is still available, because it is July 4th weekend. So I really probably won't have that many people available. Overall, I think the guesstimate was approximately $3,000, wasn't it, Mr. Cruz? And that includes whatever my staff's going to be. There's going to be off-duty draw and overtime, which more per hour when you add in the benefits we have to pay them as a town employee.
First, Chief, I have one question. The time here says 2 to 9 o'clock. Our first Sunday starts at 12. Are they going to be setting up vendors at 12 or 2 o'clock on the street? I mean, because we do.
That's a great question because I was told to ask
on
close
Sunday
to
morning.
Yeah, ideally, we would really like to see the road closed from 11 to 9, but we realize that's a long period of time. You're catching a lot of church traffic at that time too. But if the parking areas right on Hillsborough Street are blocked off, then the vendors can be setting up between 12 and 2 while the before the road actually closes, we can have some things preliminarily set up in some of those parking areas. We may not even need them all. And then at 2 o'clock when the road's closed, we just pull them out into the road.
I don't know anything about the parking spaces or anything till this is coming up by me. So that's another thing we'll have to discuss, and I don't know how to.
Yeah, it was discussed with Brian at one point, but.
I mean, I don't know how to block off all the parking spaces and have them with these.
Yeah, I don't know that we need them all. You know, it's an idea, it's a thought. It would mean that we could be rolling as soon as you close, as soon as the road's closed. You know, like we have a dunking booth.
And another concern that I just had, if we're going to have the grand finale at 9, and my permit from the DOT ends at 9, that means we have to have that road open shortly thereafter. And we've got a stage and all that in the road. So we need to get our time frame hammered out.
Is the DOT absolute maximum time frame 9?
Well, I'm kind of like that's what we give the DOT is the time we're asking for. I think we need to honor what we asked them to shut down the right-of-way.
Do we need to include time for cleanup?
Yeah. Well, I put in there a half hour before and after in the permit because that's all I was thinking was getting up our barricades and cones, and we've gotten pretty efficient through the Christmas parades and other events I've done. I feel like that's a realistic time frame because we can get out of the road and come back later and pick it up. So I felt like a half hour was a very realistic goal on each end.
We need to build in some more time if you think you need it.
Sir?
You may need to build in some more time if you think you need it.
We can work with them on that.
That resolution right there is already count for shutting down 1551 for 8 hours. So we'll have 1551 shut down for 8 hours, shut it down from 2 to 9 because a half hour before and a half hour after. So that's an 8-hour window right there.
Yeah.
That's a lot of time to shut down U.S. Highway.
The stage is a truck, you know, that'll be put into place, and then, you know, when the show's over, it can be pulled out of place. So it's not something that's got to be broken down. It's on wheels.
I mean, I don't think the DOT is going to come and cart us away if we're running a few minutes over here or there, but I just want us to be as reasonable as possible. Plus, we're going to be paying these people $30 an hour to be there until we get out of the road.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that you're used to running a very efficient operation with your staff, and now you'll be dealing with vendors.
Yeah.
Who need to be getting their wares cleaned up and moved out. So
yeah, I'll be at the mercy of.
Yeah, you might want to build in another little bit of time.
Although our vendors are experienced because they do First Sunday so often, so they do tend to they close down pretty quickly.
Well, so the vendors are going to be there from noon, and then they're not going to stay till 9. I mean, but we plan just to have the music going at 9. Like we have kids' activities and such like that in the evening. Those will stop, and then it'll just be the band. So it's not going to have everybody going till 9 o'clock.
Further questions from the board?
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. Chief, I know you can handle this. I'm very confident.
I'm glad you.
I know you can.
No, I mean, it's just something we haven't done in Pittsburgh. So, I mean, I think it's great. As y'all know, I'm a resident here, and I'm the son of a former small business owner in town. So I'm very supportive of the small businesses, and the big ones, too, for that. But I just, obviously, I want to be sure y'all understand the concerns and that we let our constituents know that there's going to be a lot of traffic coming down them side streets that they're not used to on a Sunday afternoon.
I think one of the main tenets of the Main Street program, which we remember for the last 5 years, I expect we will be for many years to come, is these kinds of festivals that promote your downtown. And so for the town to make that investment and participate with the PBA and the Main Street program, I think it's completely appropriate, and I'm glad that you guys are out there taking the lead and organizing this kind of event. And we do need to coordinate very carefully with our staff and with our police force to make sure that this works for the community. So, please work out all the details.
County too, like I say, get the courthouse lit up.
Can I just interject? The ordinance that first thing handed out, the change was a reference to a statute. But the other changes are, this assumes, and I think it's my recommendation, that there would be some kind of special event insurance to cover the liability issues for traipsing around in the middle of the street with all these activities. And you haven't really answered the question about where the additional funds are going to come from pay for the help.
Well, I think we could probably take it from the Main Street program budget. I don't think the facade grant program is spent.
We don't have a Main Street program budget per se, we have a facade program.
Right, so that's the funding I'm thinking about.
It's not been spent, so.
That's, it's part of, the facade grant program is based on the Main Street program. So if we have not spent all that money, and this is a Main Street concept, I think we can transfer the funds there.
You know what's pending?
So,
I don't have the balance on. Back here.
Facade wise, I think we've only spent $1,800.
15,000.
Is the board ready to make a motion?
I have just one other comment, though. I just want to make sure, though, that we are taking consideration of our business that are open Sunday morning. Line 1 to Baker will be one. There'll be people parking there from 7:30 that morning till we close. And I don't want to see people run out of their parking place and come in stores and stuff and say, you got to move your cars, you know, and all like this, because that does deter customers and all. So I keep that in mind.
At some point, I imagine you close at 12, the street will close at 2. I would hope that most of the cars would be gone.
Yeah.
By then. Yeah.
Yeah, but we do need to be aware there's the possibility. You know, I may, after church, you know, me and Cindy decide to go shopping, and Cindy leaves a car parked there. So you need to be aware that somebody may leave a car there. There's not so much I can do about it. That is a...
Okay. Is it something where signs can be put up that say there'd be no parking here Sunday from 1 to 10? And I know we don't have meters to hang them on, but I don't know. I've never seen those in town.
I think that'd be great. I think that level of communication would be great. Maybe even a letter to the editor of the local paper to let folks know from you, Chief Crutchfield. I don't imagine we need to tow anybody.
Yeah, that's
time around.
Concern.
And I think if there's a car sitting out there, well, that's okay. We can.
It just causes that special problem when they show up at 3:30 and need to get the car out. That's the concern.
We're learning.
Yeah.
We're learning, and we can be patient with ourselves and work through this. But I'm very optimistic about this. I think that there aren't very many opportunities for Independence Day weekend festivities in Chatham County. And my own family, we're so excited about this. We're planning to. We traditionally go to Greensboro, because that's where my wife's family is from, for the Fun Fourth Festival up there. My father-in-law is Uncle Sam every year. And we're not doing that this year because we're really excited about this event. We're going to stay in town, and we're really looking forward to it.
I think the next question is, John Bonnet's going to be Uncle Sam.
Can I second the motion?
Yes, Doug.
Hey, Dr. Bonnet, I thought about your concern about parking as well, and I wondered possibly if, given that this is a Sunday, and we have a number of vacant lots on all four corners of downtown, right, that if with a little, advanced planning and cooperation, maybe we can enlist Chatham Transit to provide little shuttles between those lots downtown to get people back and forth.
They
And
did
if we
offer
advertise
to,
it
we
up
worked it out
front.
now for the courthouse reopening. They offered to do that. It turns out we didn't need their services, but they were available to help out.
But if you think about people coming in from all four corners, you've got lots available in the school, the courthouse, you've got Alpha and Marketplace, you've got the farmers market, you've got the EDC, YMCA, you've got a number of different options. And I think if it were planned and advertised and promoted so that people knew where they could park and get a ride, you wouldn't have as much congestion potentially going through some of those side streets. People higher on spots. So just a thought.
Thank you, Dad.
And that is what happened before. Alpha Install made their parking lot available, and that's where the transit was planning to run. It turns out we didn't need it, but that was all set up, so that's a great suggestion.
All right, we have an ordinance before us declaring the road closure. Is there further discussion, or is there a motion?
I'd like to make a motion that we adopt an ordinance declaring a road closure for Pittsboro Summer Festival.
Second?
Motion by Michael Fiocco, seconded by Bette Wilson Foley. Further discussion, or those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries.
Get in touch with the sheriff.
Thank you. I got to go close on this.
Now, we're ready for agenda item number 3 under old business, which is the discussion of the budget. Brian Gruesbeck, Heather.
Thank you very much. As I said before, this is the public hearing, the required public hearing, well, actually, we passed the required public hearing now. This is actually an opportunity, I think, for us to, from a staff perspective, talk a little bit about the budget, what the highlights are, what we anticipate for the upcoming year,
I think this is not as popular an issue as the Summerfest.
Heather and I were talking about that earlier today. There's an inverse relationship between expenditures and the amount of interest and discussion. So who knows, $8 million budget versus a $15,000, maybe it would get wild and crazy festival. But at any rate, I'm sorry about the interruption on my part anyway. What we have here is a draft annual operating budget. A document was previously included or forwarded to you a couple of weeks ago. We've since then tinkered with it, revised it, trimmed some edges, weeded out some things, and I think we've come up with, at this point in time, a slightly improved document from what we've had before, and I'm sure by the time we're done, it's going to be even better than the one that you see here. I've put before you a couple of things. There was this version of the budget was forwarded to you this past Friday. In front of you tonight, I've included 2 different documents. One is a budget, an annual budget memo. It kind of gives you an outline, and we'll go over some of the highlights of the budget in that outline. And then also too, the PowerPoint. There's a brief PowerPoint presentation you see up on the screen. Both of those documents will also be put out on the web in addition to this version of the budget for future bedside reading, I think, between now and next week, or whatever we do decide to do. So I want to start, and I won't go into budget 101 here, but just a couple of budget basics. The general fund, as you guys are probably most of you aware, but just in case you forgot or you're coming across this for the first time, general fund revenues include the property taxes, shared revenue from the state, and other fees. So these are the things that the ad valorem property tax, revenue from the gasoline tax that we use. It's called Powell bill. You'll see reference later that we use to fix local streets. Some other fees, cable television fees. Those are the things that fund general fund expenditures. Now, the general fund expenditures will support general administration, will support board activities, the money you receive, or in some cases maybe you don't receive. Legal, planning, engineering, police, fire, buildings that are not wastewater treatment plant or water treatment plant, waste industries, sanitation, parks, recreation, so forth. Those are things that are typically considered general fund. And the fund, the difference between the general fund and the enterprise fund is that the enterprise, I'll go all the way to the bottom here, the enterprise fund basically is self-supporting down there. If you see the last bullet, Now, the state does require that your budget be balanced, but enterprise funds in theory are supposed to be activities. It can be anything. In our case, it's water and wastewater. And the fees from those activities support the expenditures of those activities, and you really shouldn't mix the two. They're not to be combined. Now, not to complicate things, last year and the previous years, part of the problem we had was the enterprise fund was so far out of balance in some cases, mainly due to debt, that last year we went to the rather unusual step of taking a general fund, positive general fund balance or surplus, and transferring that over, transferring existing general fund balance over to balance enterprise fund, so that we could operate that from a balance standpoint. The enterprise fund revenues from water and wastewater, and then those expenditures go for the administration, maintenance, and the maintenance of water, wastewater treatment, maintenance of the distribution and collection system, so the pipes in the ground, and then debt service, which, as I said before, was a pretty big expense. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So what I want to do tonight is I want to start off with the highlights, maybe at a slightly higher altitude. Especially we've had a long meeting already, and so I think what I'm going to do is just start with these highlights. We can get down to the granular part of the actual line items a little bit later if you want, but I'm going to start here and then see where we're at, and then keep in mind we have additional meetings that we can either set or use. We still have two regularly scheduled meetings that we can use to get through this. But let's start here, give an overview, give you a flavor for where we're sitting at right now, and then you guys can react to that. And if in between now and the next time we meet, or the next time we discuss even, feel free to ask questions. Sit down with us, go over some of this stuff, and really develop your questions moving forward. Because as I said, the piece that you have before you this evening is I'm 110% sure if that's possible, but that won't be the final version that you guys end up passing. It's just going to be the way to go. So let's start with the general fund real quick. And a housekeeping word about the document that you have here beside the recommended budget. The recommended budget contains, in addition to the table of contents, contains at the front what's called a budget ordinance. Now, by law, this is the part of the budget. By state law, this is the part of the budget where the rubber truly does hit the road. These are the things this is the section where you actually outline your revenues and expenditures, whether they balance, your fees, your fee structure, and then and rates, as well as some of the abilities and restrictions that the town manager has with regards to the budget. So that's the first part. And much of these things, you won't find some of the highlights that I'm talking about in this budget ordinance, but that is really what gets set. Now, the later part of it is the part that's not necessarily required by law, and those are the line items, and those are the things that we're not necessarily going into right this very second, but we can in a little bit if you want to get into it. Okay, highlights, general fund. As of right now, I'm not anticipating a tax increase. As you can see from the memo that I handed out, it appears as if, and you can see from your attached budget, it appears as if we are increasing revenues by about 4.5%, which is up even a little bit. I think it was 4% last year. We are expending approximately $84,451 more estimated in expenditures versus revenues. However, we have a pretty healthy fund balance that can accommodate that through a fund balance appropriation. If you were to increase taxes to balance that, I think we're at roughly 1 cent of tax allocation equals approximately $45,000 in revenue. So to balance that, we're looking at roughly a 2 cent tax per $100 of value. So potato, I think My recommendation at this point in time is to play this out a little bit, see how we're doing. If that's going to grow significantly, something, a tax increase is something you can consider, but it's not required based on our fund balance at this point in time. Last year we had budgeted a much higher fund balance, again due mainly in order to help balance enterprise funds, which I don't believe we'll need to do, and we'll get to that in just a second. Another component of this budget, particularly with regard to the general fund, is that we anticipate 2.5 pay increases for full-time, part-time, and also too, we've budgeted 2.5% for board, but I'm not going to stop there. I'll come back to that. If this 2.5% is well above COLA, believe it or not, you're checking the consumer price index for all urban. It's as of April 2016 compared to the previous 12 months, the CPIU actually declined by 0.2% or something like that, which is the first time I've put together a budget and seen that happen. So a 2.5% increase, better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick, I think, as my dad might say. Health insurance, a big part of this budget as it sits right now is that we're looking at a health insurance increase of approximately 17%, which I think is unacceptable. We have a third party, I guess, what do we call them, broker that we use to help us shop for different products, health insurance, life insurance products. We've had Blue Cross Blue Shield, what they term a quote-unquote platinum level of coverage. Based on some of the feedback I've had from recent hires, I'm not so sure how platinum it is compared to other communities. Based on that, I'm not so sure that this 17% increase isn't dead money. Unfortunately, though, the timing of which they provide us these estimates don't leave us a lot of time in order to shop for another product. So this is the classic is what it is scenario right now. We had some back and forth. He wants to meet, but it's basically to sell me this existing bill of goods, which I have plenty of other things to do. So we're going to consider, I think at this point in time, if we were to move forward, unless I hear something in advance of June 10th, which I think is their deadline for signing on the line that is dotted, unless I hear something before then, we're looking at this. But I think after that, we're going to start taking phone calls from a number of people that are interested in helping us, I think, find more affordable insurance. So, interestingly enough, at the same time, dental, although that's a kind of a smaller portion, we've gone with a different dental product that offers us the same level of benefit that's actually decreasing by 9%. Honestly, 18%. I think it would have increased by, if we had gone with our existing product, it would have increased by 9%. We switched and worked with everyone. So that is good news, but it doesn't help us out in the long run. Pittsboro Fire Department, you'll recall that in previous budget years, we fielded some pretty decent, I think, in my opinion, deserved requests for increase from the Pittsboro Fire Department as they kind of evolve from a part-time or from a volunteer staff into more of a permanent professional staff. This year, they're asking for only a 3.5% increase. The Chatham Transit, which I think has been an item of discussion for, I think, every budget year, well, actually Chapel Hill Transit in particular, and then later Chatham Transit, they are not asking for an allocation from the town of Pittsboro at this time. Powell bill, as I mentioned before, the Powell bill is revenue from state gasoline tax. We will be using that to repave a pretty significant section of Salisbury Street. John and I kind of went back and forth on some other side streets. We haven't nailed anything down yet. We really underperformed with Powellville expenditures last year, so we were able to carry some of that fund balance forward this year, and that's why you see that Powellville amount going up. We're reserving some money for storm drainage improvements that are associated with local or town streets, and I think we can, Mr. Royal can spend that in pretty short order. And then also too, there's some ability to help do some sidewalk repairs, which we had also budgeted last year, and I think we, in earnest, will get back on that. Capital buildings and equipment. Notwithstanding any town hall, any future town hall issues, as far as town-wide, we're looking at purchases for snow and ice equipment, a dump truck to accommodate mainly leaves and brush. You might recall last fall that the piece of equipment that we had to handle leaves and brush, last fall kept breaking down due to age. We got behind schedule. I know we heard about it at least one or two board meetings. I think that was the message. That was a message that was clearly received, and I think Mr. Poteet is eager to replace that piece of equipment. It's always been purchased used. I think this is the first time that it will be purchased new. We're also going to be looking at some police and admin vehicle. We, year before last, had purchased police vehicles. We would look to do the same this year, replacing 4 vehicles that are past their prime, and I think at some point in time, in the distant past, kind of outlived their usefulness in terms of cost effectiveness. The improvements that we see here in terms of capital buildings and equipment and vehicles are something that we look to tackle with 2 different installment purchase loan agreements, similar to what we had done with last year's trucks that were purchased in the utility department, and the year before that, the police cars that were purchased with the police department. That allows us, I think, to get a much-needed infusion of capital equipment at a low annual cost, albeit spread over a multi-year period. We can, as we talk a little bit more, we can identify some of these figures, but I think I have them outlined in the memo, and they do allow us, I think, to purchase the equipment and yet keep the budget within. And then finally, significant activity on the parks front. The master plan is, I think, due for this year. We have some money accommodating that. We've got some money in the plan to resurface basketball courts, as well as $15,000 for playground equipment that we, I think, had heard mentioned last week. Mr. Horn had a couple ideas, I think, before that. I think we need to talk a little bit more about that playground and about the playground that came up last week, and so we're going to do for that. And I want to make sure that we have it available. Board of Commissioner pay. You guys want to talk about this? Yeah. Late? I'm going to. Let me just work through this here a little bit. We currently have budgeted annually. The board receives a budgeted amount of approximately $3,800. The mayor receives a little bit more, $4,500. If you were to average this out per meeting, and this assumes 22. Let's just pretend you guys don't have a bunch of extra meetings during the course of the year. Let's just pretend that you only met the 22 times, the 22 regularly scheduled meetings that we set each January. That averages out to $175 per meeting for the board, $205 for the mayor. What I'm proposing is that per meeting that we increase board and mayor pay by $100 per meeting, for additional meeting to the board, and $125 per additional meeting for the mayor. this would be, this amount here that you see is actually a budgeted amount. There's no law saying or no requirement if you were to eventually pass this budget to include these figures, which it currently includes these figures. There's no reason that we have to meet these marks. Likewise, if for some reason we went well over a number of 14 additional meetings that I've estimated, and those additional meetings include the joint planning board meetings that we've already scheduled, in addition to a couple of workshops and I think one retreat. And we may even go beyond that. But if we were to reach all of those, then your total annual, we'd be looking at total annual pay of these amounts, which means that the additional pay per meeting would mean this difference right here. So if you want to just chew on that for a little bit, provide your feedback.
But the board is showing us one board member. That's not the 5 board members.
Correct. So that's each board member.
Yeah.
So we can show on that and come back to it. Enterprise fund.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Excuse me if I'm wrong. Can you go back one slide? I thought our pay was 150 per meeting instead of 175.
This is with the pay.
Maybe 2.5.
So this would assume a 2.5% increase of the rest of the staff. Enterprise fund. The debt payment, we've talked in previous budgets and gone over debt schedules and looked at what we anticipated for future debt payments. And remember, there's a point in time where we kind of said there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and I think we're getting close to that light. The last budget we had approximately $383,000 in debt service on the enterprise fund side. This year it's down to $197,000. So that's helping out our enterprise fund balance considerably. I'm not proposing a rate increase. You may recall that the work done with the School of Government did identify some possible schedules for rate increases. One such possibility included a rate increase for this year. We can certainly come back and visit that before the end of the budget, but at this point in time, we're actually, I think, thinking that that's not going to be necessary. Yes, sir.
For a second. I'm seeing this figure in this presentation of 197 in the debt service schedule in the recommended budget. It's like significantly different, 169,000.
Yep, there's 2 different.
Okay, so I'm just got it.
Right, so if you look on the last page, the very last page of the packet, there is enterprise fund principal payment in that schedule as well.
That's got 91 in there. Is that what I'm looking at? 91?
Yeah, but the total is not all enterprise. So that total, that's just the total for that page. So there's a principal payment, and under it says enterprise. Are you on page 16?
Yeah.
So there's the way I'm broken it down. This is one loan that is split between general fund and enterprise fund.
Okay.
So that enterprise part is added to the 167,000 to make up the 197.
Okay. I'm not seeing anything. I'm seeing police vehicles, utility trucks, backhoe.
Yeah. So under that, where it says principal payment.
Of 26,000.
Yeah. So, but do you see it says principal payment general and principal payment enterprise?
Got it. Okay.
So the enterprise principal and interest are added on to the enterprise amounts from the debt schedule on page 16.
Okay.
And that makes it up.
Got it.
Thank you.
Now, looking at it, we're not anticipating a rate increase. Water treatment, on the water treatment plant side, we're looking at for purchases this upcoming year. I think Mr. Pickett had indicated during previous meetings and during a retreat the need for an emergency generator at the Haw River raw water intake. You'll recall that prior to a year or two ago, we did not have an emergency generator at our water treatment plant, which boggles the mind. So in the event that, let's just think about the water treatment plant for a second, in the event that we did not have the ability to pump more water into the town from the water treatment plant, and there was a power outage, we would be relying on basically whatever was in our tanks and in our system. So with that emergency generator at the water treatment plant, you could at least pump water out of our tanks at the water treatment plant into our system. That, however, doesn't do us much good if we are without power for any length of time at the Haw River. So we wouldn't, theoretically, we wouldn't be able to bring in raw water from the Haw River to resupply the plant if power went out for an incredibly long length of time. So this kind of takes extra measures to protect us from the very worst case scenarios. And so we're looking at again, budgeting money for an annual installment payment for that. Also, we're going to be looking at a meter to measure potable water flow from the water treatment plant into the system, so that we have a better idea more accurately measure the water that we're actually using on a timely basis.
So that would actually measure the water that we're pumping into the system?
Accurately.
Yeah, because we're trying to find where we're losing some water. Okay.
On utilities department, now this is where once the water is actually treated, whether it's the wastewater plant or it's water heading through the wastewater plant, what our utilities department generally deals with our collection and distribution system, or the pipes in the ground. As such, one of the things Mr. Royal and Mr. Poteet are coming across is the need for a remote camera, what I call a pipe drone, something that would be actually in the pipe to kind of video or get a visual for where problems are occurring and what the nature of the problems are, and so that helps us determine what types of improvements have to be made. And if you really want to geek out with us sometime, watch some of those videos. I still think they're interesting. I've been doing this for a while. We've in the past always hired that sort of thing out, be it from Hydra Structures or anybody else that has them. The problem is that, like anything else, once everybody gets busy, those cameras are hard to find. And so this would allow us to be able to try to just keep the ball rolling a little bit in terms of our own systemic maintenance and improvements.
Is there much training that goes along with that, or is this just user-friendly, just go in there and start driving around?
Yes, it's pretty simple. But the camera that we're talking about using is a push camera. It's not like you can do like no more than 200 feet of line with it. It's mostly for laterals and who's connected and not connected laterals, so that's what that's for.
And you want to talk about the locator?
Yes. The locator is for when we locate utilities other than our utilities in the right of way for construction or other purposes that to keep our guys from hitting electrical lines, hitting storm lines or whatever. But we just need some better locating equipment. All we have right now is a metal locator. We can't locate plastic. This is actually a locator that can locate plastic or metal. So now that the rules are pretty tight on locations, we just need to do a better job at it.
Do we call in for location services when we got a project, or we typically are working on emergency situations?
We require by law.
Well, I know, I'm thinking about our own operations.
Even us.
Okay, so if we've got an emergency, we've got to wait for the location.
Yeah, we get an emergency located. And normally, if we call, they can have, somebody will come out within maybe 2 or 3 hours.
Okay.
Or sometimes even less. It depends on where they are at the time.
I'm used to everybody complaining about it taking weeks.
Well, not for emergency. You got a water line leaking or water coming out of the ground, you have to get somebody out pretty fast. So by the time you gear up, get everything ready to work on the water line, normally somebody will, be out there located.
But this would allow you the fine tuning and to reconfirm the locator's marks.
Right.
As you're actually.
Right. We can locate it ourselves, and then we have a good idea of where everything is. And we can make sure that we know where some of our lines are also.
So those two capabilities, I'm going to guess that other towns our size have those?
Yeah, it's required by law now to be able to locate utilities, to locate all your utilities within the right of way. The penalties are pretty tight now. It's pretty big penalties for not doing it. And you have to always call 811. And we're a member of 811 also.
Sure. Well, that's the practice of location, but to possess the capacity to both locate and to do remote camera inspections, those two capabilities, are we an outlier in being a town of our size and not having that capability?
Well, we do have that capability, but we just want to get better at what we do. Some towns still use clothes hangers and locate it by when they cross each other. Some people still do that. I've got a guy on staff that actually does that sometimes too, just to check. But that's not the way you want to do it. We've got a locator, but the locator, we're real limited to what we can do with ours. So we just have to, start getting better equipment so we don't have those accidents when we dig. You have to justify when you do dig, and you have to dig before 811 can get out. You have to justify what you did. You have to be able to justify how did you know we didn't have anything here, other than just looking at the lines to see how they run. And so that's another tool that helps us do that also.
Wastewater treatment plant, you'll see there's an increase in there for lab costs. Previously we had a lab technician that was split between the wastewater plant and the water treatment plant. The lab technician determined that he was busier at the wastewater plant and wasn't used as much at the water treatment plant. And so we dropped him to half-time. He found another job. In the meantime, we still need to send samples to labs from both treatment facilities, and so those lab costs were already assumed by the water treatment plant, by the water treatment plant by and large. You'll see a jump in your line items for an increase for lab costs on that as a result. Sewer system asset management plan. Mr. Royal has been starting to work a little bit about this. Fred, you want to talk to Joe about that?
Not exactly, unless
Okay.
is there questions. I don't know what to say other than it's in the packet.
Yeah, the sewer system. We want to make sure that we have the wherewithal to basically deal with the operation and maintenance, the cost structures of making sure that we have adequate facilities, and so we budgeted increased monies to plan for essentially valuing and maintaining our sanitary sewer system. Is that accurate? Okay. I can't say that twice. Water system interconnection study, we may have referenced and discussed in the past. the need to determine where our water system is interconnected with other water systems, in particular, in this case, Chatham County. There has been some preliminary conversations between town and county staff on where some of these systems are connected and how they would operate once water, for lack of a better way to put it, was actually flowing. I think there's more work to be done to determine what exactly these interconnections would do for us moving forward if we decided to, for instance, take advantage of certain connections for increased capacity down the line. At any rate, we need to start putting some numbers and some narrative to what's out there right now, and so we've budgeted for a study, and I think Fred has that essentially teed up and ready to go. Once we get to go ahead for this, we'll start producing some data and some narrative on it. So now to finalize, again, the budget has to be approved by June 30th, 2016. The document can be adjusted throughout the fiscal year after June 30th. We do budget adjustments and we do reconciliations. There are a couple of things that aren't entering into this budget that we frankly need a little bit more information on, and we will be coming back. I think a great example is the force main issue, and some of the conversations that we're having another one tomorrow on any deal points and numbers on that interconnection and what that does for our rate structure, and any work that we would be doing with financial advisors to that end. Also, we'll be filling in some blanks on this, and more work will be done throughout the year. Rest assured that there are other things that will be done throughout the year. And, in the near term, as we look at this, if you guys feel like you have the need for a special session to kind of go into more detail on some of this stuff, we certainly are able to do that. If not, I believe our next meeting is June 13th.
We've got 3 weeks.
Yeah, June 13th is the next board meeting. So there's certainly time between now and then if you did want to schedule an additional meeting. But if you feel like you want to give us some feedback on this tonight, you can certainly mark it up. Provide you some more information on the 13th. There are some things that I want to fine tune a little bit even on this moving forward. So with that, I guess I asked if you have any other questions. Certainly, Heather has any other comments. The altitudinal view or the higher view, I think I've tried to take a shot at giving you an idea of what we're looking at this coming fiscal year. Some of the more detailed questions, Heather, I think, has done a great job in terms of kind of getting right down in the weeds and trying to figure out what some of the particular numbers are and will be. And then too, I think the thing that I think we're very far ahead is the actual formatting of the document itself, which for some reason is always a problem. But I think we're really close, not completely done on that, which is going to allow us some time to save for it. So I guess with that, I would open up for any comments or questions you have, and we can certainly go into more discussion if you like, or carry this forward for another time.
I'd like to jump back to one thing about the sewer system asset management plan real quick. Sure. I think in the write-up on the consent agenda item, it talked about downloading data for GIS use. In my mind, I'm thinking we're getting the data from Hydrostructures who's already piled a ton of that information. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that's our foundation data.
Yeah.
But we would collect more data, and we would basically make it more accurate. Our W.K. Dixon contract phase 1 found that there's a lot of data gaps, and then we just flat out don't have all the information that's out there infrastructure-wise. So we have a new handheld GPS unit, and we can use that, staff can use that.
Do we have all the data from hydrostructures in our own system?
Yes.
Great.
We don't have the GIS licenses required to use it the way we want to. So we're actually doing some staff training right now, and we're going to purchase some more, a couple of licenses that are kind of free floating. You can up to 2 users. So we're moving in that direction. So we're kind of going to free ourselves from the relying on hydrostructures. And the asset management plan would be more, it would be smart, it would prioritize, and then it would, in the end game, it would give us CIP prioritized projects for the sewer system repairs moving forward.
Other questions?
I got just one question, and I may have fell asleep during it, I'm sorry, Brian, but this is a new dump truck body. Are we just getting a leaf body, or are we getting a dump truck? I'm sorry.
No, it's really confusing if you don't normally buy the trucks like that, but you have to buy the truck chassis and the body separately now. There's a company that makes the bed, the body, and there's a company that makes the cab. So you have to buy them from 2 different places and then get them to put it together.
Well, we are getting automatic transmission.
After the meeting, I'll show you the brochure.
That's all I have.
Other questions?
Well, I know I definitely need to study it more thoroughly. One thing that I'd like for us to consider and put into this budget is more support for the Main Street program. We do have the facade grant program, and it looks like folks weren't taking advantage of it this year, and I don't know why it is. I mean, I think it's a great opportunity if you see up your storefront with some help. But, the Main Street program needs to do other things, such as these promotions and these events. So I'd like to find a way for us to make a town contribution to that program that may be managed by PBA. Maybe, in fact, I think the push now is to actually have a board representing the Main Street with meeting minutes, officers, all of that, and they could manage or at least make requests of funds we can set aside to help for promotional activities to, get folks to downtown Pittsboro and make it the center of Pittsboro, both business as well as government. So, the figure that I have been working with is about $30,000, which is,
just for staff,
just for Main Street programs.
Oh, okay. So I have a similar understanding, but that the federal funding for Main Street program will eventually or soon require that the Main Street program either be independently directed. It has to have an executive director. It has to have a paid staffer. And I'm told that Pittsboro Main Street program is looking into establishing as a 501c3, and so I think it would be. It begs the question in my mind: are we currently funding any nonprofits?
Well, you're limited. I mean, it's the answer to that is.
Or have we historically?
Retire NC. There was an allocation that's made for Retire NC this year, and I haven't proposed any cut for that this year, assuming that goes forward at the same level of involvement. I don't believe we spent all of that money.
But is that more like a subscription than a salary?
We pay the costs. Is Mr. Evans still here? We pay the costs of some of their travel to events. We use some marketing pieces that are associated with it. But that in and of itself, I mean, to answer your question, that's not a nonprofit per se. That's just sort of something that we fund that maybe is outside of the box of something that we typically fund. We provide the county EDC. We have a contract with the county EDC And aside from that, we don't, we're kind of limited statutorily for how we can actually spend on nonprofits, money on nonprofits. So as a result, we don't. I mean, there may be from time to time some assistance that we provide in kind to different organizations over the course of the year, and that's nothing that we hard budget. But having any sort of contractual relationships with anyone like that, like United Way or anything else, we don't.
So then,
I think there's one time I said I was on the board that there was an event that we had someone said it was an event that took place. Do you remember that? I can't remember specifically what it was. I have some vague memory that we did donate. No, it was something for somebody else was doing. It's not very much. They didn't ask very much. And we gave them a small amount for the event. But it was something specifically next.
Your appropriations are supposed to be for public purposes, so you've got to remember that. Right.
So then it would be an in-kind support that we would offer through staff time, potentially in support of Pittsboro Main Street program to the extent that it overlapped with public good.
Well, how the Main Street programs is, and you're correct in that your assessment of the situation as far as the Main Street program is concerned, I think is definitely heading in the right direction. We currently have a small town Main Street program which does not require staff. That's being phased out, and it will to be an actual Main Street program by definition. We would be required to fund, or there would be needed to be funded, a staff position that's dedicated a certain number of hours to fulfill Main Street goals and objectives. There are many communities do essentially fund that position, on behalf of the Main Street program, even as they stand alone. So that's something that we could consider. The discussion that I had with Main Street a few weeks ago was kind of in that direction. Okay. I know there are additional conversations that are going to be taking place on that. And as this budget sits right now, I have $15,000 in there that was basically the same allocation that we had for our facade program in previous years. There is, I think there's another economic development allocation too in another location that pays for RNC and the allocation to the county EDC, which is sometimes a landing spot or a source of funding for this type of activity as well. There's certainly nothing that would prevent us in the future, like we discussed a little bit earlier in the meeting, as far as this festival that we have coming up, from using some of that $15,000 that's remained unused over the course of the year to help support this downtown event. To my knowledge, I mean, there's been some funding that's been committed for it, but I think that's by and large been used for marketing at this point. Actual operations end of it is something that the town from soup to nuts is going to have to provide on. So if we're interested in doing those types of events, I think Commissioner Fiocco is correct. We would need to allocate money for it. At this point in time, I have $15,000 in it that could be used for it, or it could be used for facade improvement. My attitude towards facade improvement is that as long as there's still a board willingness out of that line item to use that line item for facade improvement program, if there was a really involved high quality project that came about that was going to require us to look at our budget, that would be a good problem to have. And I think that, we would come to you, I think, at that point in time and possibly look to amend the budget if we're running short as far as facade improvement goes. So it's all really important.
Well, I do want to find a way to put more money towards some of the other aspects of the Main Street program, which is the events and the promotion. So that's what I'm talking about, and keeping the facade grant program intact.
Yeah, I think
we've got a lot of momentum. We've got a really engaged community trying to make things happen through the Main Street program. So I'd like to support them as much as we can.
Is this something? Am I hearing from the board a recommendation for staff to possibly look at increasing that allocation or creating a line to help support those types of events. Is that something you'd like us to support and come back to?
I would support that.
It doesn't have to be a formal issue. We can play around with these numbers.
Just going to look into it.
Yeah.
Bruce, I have one question. In reference to Chatham Transit, is that line item still here, or you are not showing it?
We didn't have it in the budget last year because, as you recall, the county, Chatham County, stepped forward and paid, our portion of it, so to speak. So I didn't receive a request, and so I specifically asked the county manager this year, just because I don't like surprises. And she forwarded it on to the director, and the director said, no, they're not asking for a request in Pittsburgh.
Since that funding was specifically outlined from the ABM store, those funds were supposed to offset the bus and all of that, so are you going to have that set aside for what may come up later on, or what's the situation with that? Will you still have that as a funding?
Yeah, it's a general fund revenue, so it just, it goes to support other general fund activities. I haven't contemplated any other earmarks for that.
Any further comments or questions? So, is the pleasure of the board to set a special meeting, or do you want to just approach this at the next regularly scheduled board meeting?
Regularly scheduled, unless there's something else.
No, I suspect what's going to happen is you guys are going to look at this a little bit more over the next week and a half or so. You're going to have questions, and you can save them up for that meeting, or feel free to, direct them at us, either whatever works for you.
I'd say let's give it a shot at the next meeting, and after that, if we feel like we need to schedule a special meeting, we can do it then.
Yeah, I packed the agenda pretty full tonight. I think otherwise you guys would be a little bit more rare to go on.
Well, I've got a couple of questions, but both of them I think will have detailed responses, so I'm going to follow up offline.
All right.
All right, then we will be moving to additional updates and reports. Does the manager have?
No, I didn't include anything in fact. I'll just say just real quick, and maybe Fred has some more information. I don't know if you guys have noticed, we're not building a swimming pool in front of Town Hall here. That is actually a stormwater.
We got the diving board on order. It's a 4-foot. So
well, and the press has just left, which is a real shame because we've really gotten a lot of questions about it. And then, of course, there was a day I drove up there, and you all. And I rolled down the window and asked if y'all had lost something. And there was absolutely no laughing at all. I could tell that was a really...
It was not appreciated.
Yeah.
Somebody lost a shovel. It's sticking up in the middle of the water.
I think we found one.
That's been an ongoing...
I'd be happy to...
ongoing stormwater project. We received money, the 319 grant. You might have heard that. The same pool of money is, no pun intended, is also going to fund a BMP or a treatment facility or mechanism, similar thing. I don't believe we'll have as much digging involved with that. We'll end up on the traffic circle.
That'll be done by a contractor.
Yeah. So it's obviously slowed down this week because of wet weather. We're not going to lose anybody in the mud, so probably slowed down until, I would imagine, later this week things warm up a little.
Yeah, hopefully Wednesday we'll resume.
The force main, the wastewater treatment plant force main project, a meeting, Fred and I and Mr. Messick will be going down to Sanford tomorrow and speaking with some of those folks about some of the terms on a deal for intergovernmental agreement for possibly sending wastewater to Sanford's Big Buffalo wastewater treatment plant. We will also have our financial advisors, Davenport Company there, Ted Cole, and Mitch Gruglio. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but they will be also involved. I've had some back and forth with them on some of the deal points of this. At this point in time, we'll be looking forward to circling back to you guys and information from that, as well. If you've been around in our building here, we've been tearing up these back rooms over here, and I can show you that before you leave if you really want to see a mess. But they've been making some progress on knocking out a couple walls from Paul Horn's old office, the old copy room there. And now it's open between my current or old office there and Paul's old office and his closet. So it's kind of an open space with some stuff, wires and things sticking out of the ground. And I thought about working in there, but I can't really work in there with the sawzall going. So I've been out here. If you need to look, if you're wandering around the building and need to find me, I'm either in here or I'm in one of the other offices or both together and working on the budget or whatever. So that's continuing to move forward. And off the top of my head, it's just been budget 24/7 to this point in time, and we're kind of filling in other projects as we can. So with that, I tap out. If you guys have any comments or questions, I'll do my best.
Well, I'd like to think that we could end this marathon session on an upbeat note. This past week, I've had two really wonderful compliments, and one was a constituent complimented our website, and I think one of the things that the communications company had said was that we needed to rework it, and we'd all commented that various times we'd had trouble finding stuff. But this person was very excited about how he spends a lot of time out of the town, and he's able to keep up with everything that goes on in the town through the website, and he's very pleased about it. The other thing was the compliment about the repaving of the tennis courts. When we were out at Abundance on Saturday, Lyle Lester said that he was just thrilled that the tennis courts had been fixed. He was very comfortable to hear about the job done there. Are there any other commissioner concerns? Jay?
No, I don't have anything at this time.
Beth?
No.
I do have one. I have been thinking after the last joint meeting about this concept of gateways, and it's put a new light on my travels around town as I think about the county vicinity. And I'm wondering, I'm noticing a lot of debris that I never noticed before when I wasn't thinking about the gateways. And I'm wondering if it's possible to ask DOT to clean the debris off the overpasses, specifically the overpasses and bridges over the river in vicinity to town. It's not in town, but it is in what may be construed as our gateway, and specifically the area in front of Lowe's around the median. Just a lot of junk around the median. And I don't know how we would go about that. The DOT guy is no longer here, I don't believe. Recognizing that it's outside of town, I'm just wondering if maybe we could place a call about that and who that call would go to. I'm happy to make the call, but
we'll find out.
Great. Thank you.
Anything further? Is there a motion to adjourn? So moved. Second. That one thing.